You can now find me on RoadStr, the app connecting people through cars.
Hello everybody, in today's video, the king is dead. But how will he be remembered? You join me today in a 2017 Nissan GT-R Track Edition, and this is a bit of a three-part video in which we'll be talking about what is the GT-R Track Edition, is it any good, and how are we going to see the GT-R going forward now that it has, here in Europe, finally been discontinued. In case you are not aware, 2022 will see the final deliveries of the iconic R35 GT-R in many key territories, including Europe and Australia. As it happens, we were in fact one of the last territories to actually get the car in the first place. These went on sale at the very end of 2007 in their home market, then came to America in 2008, before finally arriving in Europe in early 2009. Though there have been many changes to the car over its decade and a half thus far production run, it is still fundamentally the exact same car that was launched 15 years ago. There are, I suppose, two ways you could see this. On the one hand, you could say Nissan have been rather lazy, because in that time Porsche have introduced, facelifted and discontinued whole generations of both the 911 and Boxster Cayman. On the other, you could instead say that what Nissan have chosen to do is to take something that was already really rather good and refine it to the point of perfection. As a non-GT-R obsessive, it would be very easy to believe the former. After all, the engine is fundamentally the same 3.8-litre twin-turbocharged V6 introduced in 2007. The gearbox is still a 6-speed DCT, as it was when the car was launched. And although the power output of this car has grown, so has that of most of its rivals, to the point now that where the GT-R was once all-conquering, in most group tests it's one of the slower, more affordable cars. This is despite a massive increase in the list price. It started around the £50,000 mark and wound up close to 100,000. The most significant change for many came in 2017, when the car received a rather significant facelift. The exterior styling changed quite dramatically, inspired by the very flashy and rather pricey Nismo variant, and the interior got a thorough overhaul too. The number of buttons was reduced dramatically, and a lot of effort was made to try and make this car feel a little bit more upmarket. The earlier models had always received criticism that the interior was just a little bit lackluster. Of course, for many, nobody ever expected a car with the GT-R badge to have a flash interior. That's never really been the Japanese way. Instead, they were more interested in the way that it went. And it always went rather well. Today is actually the first time I've ever driven a more or less unmodified example of a GT-R. The first thing you notice after you prod the start button and the car fires into life and you go to pull away is just how many noises it makes. The diffs in here chunter and make all sorts of a racket, and you could easily think that the car was broken. It's not. They all do that, sir. The funny thing is that the R35, like its predecessors, is a car that's often been accused of being simply a computer on wheels, something you really don't need to drive in order to go fast. However, I think anybody that's actually got behind the wheel of one will know that's absolute hogwash. These are one of the most engaging and involving cars you can buy, except you can't buy them anymore. Before we get on to exactly what makes the track edition so special, a little bit of a musical interlude, and I need to right a previous wrong. Because the last time I drove a GT-R was a beautiful Katsura Orange Edition, I believe more or less the same model year, and when I got home I found out that none of the footage sounded that dramatic. One of the problems the GT-R has is that it can carry quite a lot of speed without needing to use all the revs, so I found like my footage just wasn't as dramatic as I would have liked. Allow me to try and correct that now. Whether this sounds any more dramatic than the last time or not, I do not know. However, it's very unusual getting in this car and being able to hear yourself think. As it happens, there's quite a few things that struck me as rather unusual hopping into this car out of the F12. That is impossibly wide, low, and has a lot of room in it. The GT-R is a car that has a reputation for also being absolutely enormous, but its owner accurately described it as a bit of a reverse TARDIS, because you hop into this and it feels cramped. Really quite cramped. The upside though, because you're sat a little bit higher than feels right, is that you can place the car a lot better than you might expect. Very key for being able to really enjoy it on a narrow road like this. And enjoy it you really can. The engine seems to have punch more or less all the time, but we'll investigate further shortly, and the gearbox does not feel as old as it is. It doesn't have the whip crack of a lot of other cars that I drive, but it's more than competent. And I haven't even actually touched any of the driving modes down here. I have been told that the first thing you really want to do is to put the chassis into comfort mode, which I'm going to do now. Yep, comfort mode is engaged, and that has indeed just taken actually quite a bit of the edge off. We're on a slightly better bit of road here now. I am going to put the powertrain into its R mode. My life, this thing's got some go in it. 562 horsepower here, 466 pound-foot of torque. That's about 160 shy of the Ferrari, but because of a very trick all-wheel drive system that I'm told is essentially a Navara on steroids, it actually will beat the Ferrari to 62. These are actually also rather rear biased. Today, when it's dry and the road surface is relatively decent, you're unlikely to find the limit. However, if the weather isn't quite so good or you're on track, these will kick out at the rear. Whoa! This is something, I tell you. So then, what makes the track edition quite so special? You're probably all familiar with the regular GT-R, and you're probably all familiar with the Nismo. In case you're not, the Nismo is the sort of all guns blazing, hardcore, borderline road racer made by Nissan's motorsport division. That's what Nismo stands for. Or at least I hope it is, because otherwise I look like a proper Berg. More so than usual. The two big problems with the Nismo are that all who've drove it seem to say, yes, it's hilarious, it's brilliant, it's wonderful, but it's also ludicrously stiff and sometimes just unenjoyable on the public roads, and it's also very expensive. £150,000 if you want to get yourself into one of those, versus the sort of 80-odd thousand pounds of the regular car. The Track Edition, or to give it its full title, the Track Edition engineered by Nismo, takes nearly all of the chassis enhancements that car gets, but without the engine side, and does so for a lot less money. So you get the wider track at the front, you get lightweight alloys, you get the Dunlop N1 spec tyres, you get a hollow anti-roll bar at the rear, you get Bilstein Damtronic suspension, which apparently is the same as the Nismo, although all the reviews said this car is still quite a bit softer. So where the difference between the two is coming from, we're not sure. Perhaps that's in the bushings and all that sort of stuff, because that can make quite a big difference. If there's a GT-R expert out there who can enlighten me, please do. You also get a carbon fibre wing as standard. You can option a carbon fibre boot lid, as this car has, and the claim is a weight saving of around 20 kilos. Not that in all fairness you're ever likely to notice it in a car that weighs 1.8 tonnes. Even in the comfort mode though, this is still very typical GT-R. In other words, at no point does it have any interest in cosseting you. Rather, it says, well, you've chosen to drive this bumpy old road, you can suffer for it. The Dunlop tyres, I do believe, are part responsible for this rather harsh ride. A lot of people choose to fit alternatives which are a little bit softer, but at the cost of a little bit of that initial turn-in and bite, of which this car has quite a bit. Most impressively of all, this car actually also gets the upgraded chassis from the Nismo, which has a bunch of extra welding and bonding in it to make it just that little bit more rigid. That's really rather serious engineering, and all of that is yours for about £12,000 over the base car. So it's still some £30,000+ cheaper than the full-fat Nismo. I think it's fair to say that not that many people were particularly convinced by the idea of a stiffer, more hardcore GT-R. And for that reason, here in the UK in 2018, they allegedly sold 4. That's it. Of which this car's owner, Neil, was one, because he's had it from new. So, was it a silly idea? A bit of it. The way really to think of this is still as a deeply flawed car, but one where Nissan have realised the buyers know what they've signed up for, so instead you may as well simply give them the full fat experience. It's kind of like somebody who says, you know what I want? I want a triple chocolate cookie with some whipped cream on, but at the end they've gone, no, marshmallows, that's too much. With this, what Nissan have done is said, you know what I think people actually want? They want a triple chocolate cookie, deep fried, with sprinkles, a huge dollop of ice cream, a mountain of whippy cream, and a flake. The engine is absolutely sensational, and that's the one bit of the package they kind of left alone. There is turbo lag, you cannot deny it, but in fairness, it's so smooth and progressive, and actually feels like traction control. The car meters in the power with just enough care that you don't feel like it's going to overwhelm you. It responds well and pulls hard at pretty much every given opportunity. The steering, a little lighter than I really would like, but it still has genuine feel. You can trust this car. The turn-in is absolutely sensational. It bites hard. Anybody who talks about understeering one of these is either driving a bad car or they're on track and going so fast, you really do need to back off. Visibility, actually not so bad too. The rear three-quarters is not excellent, but it's not really too much of a worry most of the time. Out the front, you can see more of the car than you might think. Those little ridges in the front, slightly more pronounced, and make the car feel more three-dimensional than you may imagine. I really like that. These seats are the standard items. You could also get some optional carbon buckets, but they do a really good job. The overhaul that Nissan did for 2017 on the interior, I think really worked, and make the car feel just that little bit more upmarket and much more worthy of its near £100,000 asking price, as this car was with all the spec on. It never really feels like this car is lacking in either grunt or grip. The brake pedal is absolutely beautifully set up. They may be only steels here. In fact, even the Nismo only got steels by default, but they seem to work quite well. They are enormous and rather expensive, and as it happens, the entire GT-R experience is not cheap. A lot of people talk about Italian cars as if they've got some sort of monopoly on eye-watering running costs. Oh no, the Japanese can do it just as well as anyone else. In fact, when Neil had his first GT-R, a 2014, he realised that he could actually buy and run a Nissan Leaf essentially for free if he just stopped putting quite so many miles on the GT-R. Sure, the infotainment display down here is really rather out of date, despite being the newer, fancier one. The car even has a reasonably sized boot, which as it turns out was rather important, because when I said to Neil why he didn't buy one of the perhaps obvious alternatives like a second-hand McLaren or something like that, he said, I would have loved to, but where would I put my guns? I love the people I get to meet doing this job. They're the best bit, honestly. The cars are, yeah, okay. The people are brilliant. GT-R specialist Litchfield are actually quite taken with the track edition, and for that reason they actually use it as a bit of inspiration for some of the models that they do. The one bit I think they just simply cannot recreate though is the chassis, because to do so would be awfully expensive. If you want one, just go and buy one of these if you can find it. So then, if you're willing to live with the compromise, this is definitely a car worth buying. However, what's going to happen to these in future? Historically, when a model is discontinued, prices only ever tend to go one way, down. But with the GT-R, I don't think that's going to happen for a number of reasons. First off, if there is going to be an R36, it's not going to be very long-lived. It's going to have quite a few issues to contend with, including the noise regulations, which are the reason this is being killed off. In Australia, I'm told it was also crash regs. I'm not entirely convinced that there is actually going to be an opportunity to really build a true successor to this car. If it does get a replacement, it's almost certainly going to be hybrid. And I don't think the sort of people that like this kind of raw, authentic experience want that. I know it's got a reputation for being a bit of a heifer, but you can drive this thing like a hot hatch. And it'll put a smile on your face like a hot hatch, which not all proper performance cars can. Car prices at the moment overall are also in some sort of weird limbo thanks to a massive combination of factors. There is also a huge appetite for Japanese stuff, and that's certainly helping GT-R prices stay rather buoyant. But when I think in a few years others will subside back to where they were, I think the GT-R isn't going to follow suit. I think it's going to remain pretty strong. And going further forwards, depending on what happens, and there are a lot of variables right now, I do think this has got every chance of becoming just as well regarded and as valuable as its predecessors. Allow me to explain why. There are a number of factors you require in order for something to be a true, genuine, desirable classic. And I think the GT-R has nearly all of them. First off, you need a car that actually was any good, and the GT-R is. Even the early cars were pretty well regarded, flawed as they may be, they still had more than enough to make them a highly desirable proposition. Secondly, they have rarity on their side. Yes, they may have only shifted 4 of these track editions in the UK a few years ago, but overall they sold, allegedly, some 11 and a bit thousand GT-Rs in Europe during the car's production run. That's not many. That, I suspect, makes it as rare as, or not far off, your equivalent Ferrari, because most of those, though they sell in smaller numbers, also have much shorter production runs. These are also a bit of a tuner's darling, and that's both good and bad. If the car has been worked on by a regarded specialist like Litchfield, you'll find people will still happily buy into them, and indeed, I think these are a car that come alive with a few subtle modifications. These cars, I think, work really well with about this amount of power. 560 to 600 is absolutely perfect. Yes, you can get an awful lot more, but you do start to create quite a few problems when you do that. However, if you are into your investment grade cars, you generally want to buy into something that was perhaps a little rarer to begin with and is also unmolested, like this. The only real modification here is an imported system from America which allows the wing mirrors to fold. Why that wasn't standard on a 100 grand car, I don't know. Because of their nature, these are also cars you're going to find getting crashed a lot. That means there'll be a lot of bad examples out there, and there'll also be a lot less examples out there as time goes by. History has also told us that very often you find the cars which initially didn't command that much of a premium can often do so later down the line. Take, for example, the BMW E46 M3 CSL, or the Ferrari Challenge Stradale. That didn't actually cost an awful lot more than a regular 360 when new, at 20 grand or so, I think. But now, you'd be paying more like 120 grand more to get one. I'm not so sure the track edition will go the same way, but if you want to buy a Nismo, they were 150 grand new, and used, they're 150 grand. I suspect chiefly because so few people were ever brave enough to buy one. And last of all, for me, if a car's going to achieve true greatness, real, genuine love, it needs the X factor, that piece of magic. Because let's be honest here, an old Rolls-Royce is a very good car, still does its job reasonably well, is rare, was expensive new, can be also quite expensive to run, but those are really cheap now because they don't have the X factor. These really, really do. If you're not sure what I mean, just ask any GT-R owner what happens if they take the car out and they stop somewhere. People will talk to you. People will ask you questions. People are fascinated by them. People lust after them. People want them. These are also cars that have now been around for so long that people have become familiar with the shape, so they know this is the one that they want. I really love the old Skylines, R32, 3 and 4, all absolutely brilliant cars. But they're now commanding such silly money. I'm sure a lot of people out there are thinking, should have bought one of those, missed the boat. But they'll also be turning their attention towards these, going, they're probably not going to make much similar to this afterwards, if they ever do at all, which means they could wind up being quite a good buy, which means people will start wanting to buy into them, particularly the desirable examples, which in turn pushes the prices up, and you get an example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Very often I drive cars which now command a premium that they simply cannot justify. But in the case of the GT-R, this is a car that I've never owned one, and I actually really didn't like them when they came out. Couldn't stand the looks. Over the last sort of 15 years, it's slowly been chipping away at me to the point now where, you know something, I'm really going to miss the old girl. And if you want one without paying through the nose for it, you may think you've already missed the boat. I don't think so. Because just wait and see what's going to happen next. These prices aren't going down. And for once, I think they're going in the correct direction. Anyway, that's all from me. A huge thank you to Neil for lending me his beautiful ultimate silver Nissan GT-R Track Edition. Thanks to you for watching. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.